Good afternoon, Lindsay from Freedom Media WA. We're at Perth, Western Australia Parliament House. We have been here streaming earlier. We did say that we were going to get an interview with the Honourable Nick Goiran MLC, and of course you can see standing next to me is the Honourable Nick Goiran. Thank you for your time and for taking this interview.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Lindsay, and thank you for your patience. It's been an interesting day so far in Parliament, and interesting the distinction between those who are tolerant to freedom of speech and debate and those who are not, but we're here to talk about some other things this afternoon.
We are, and one of the things I guess I did reach out to Nick Goiran's office, and I asked about the COVID pandemic inquiry, which public submissions closed this Thursday, the 16th, and of course straight away you made yourself available, and that's what we're here to talk about. So I guess firstly, for the public, do you think is there still time for people to make a submission?
Yes, look, absolutely. I really would encourage every Western Australian who has a strong view about the management of the pandemic to take the opportunity that still exists for about another 48 hours. And that's why I'm particularly grateful to Lindsay and his team for broadcasting this at this time. There is only about 48 hours left, 2 more days in which people can express their views about the pandemic. And I know that Western Australians have a diversity of views with respect to the pandemic. Whether you think that the government's approach was good, bad or ugly, now is the time to say something. There's absolutely no point in having a view from Friday onwards, because then submissions will be closed to this independent inquiry by the government.
And I think coming back to the submissions, I'd say one of the things that I've been looking at myself is that the terms of reference seem to have been made, which is no surprise, by the McGowan government. They are particularly narrow, and that people, if you are thinking of making that submission, what would you say, without telling people what to say, because only they can decide, yes. But to keep the emotion out of it, because the last thing people want to do is make a submission and it failed the test of getting actually published.
Yes, look, I think that like all inquiries, the important thing is to be concise. For a lot of us, particularly if you've had a very traumatic lived experience, the natural inclination is to tell the full story. But remember, the reviewers are probably going to have to go through thousands and thousands of these submissions. So if you want to have the most effective submission, the best thing to do is to ensure that your submission is concise. And as Lindsay says, try as best as possible to remove the emotion out of it. Now, that doesn't mean not to tell your story. If you've had a lived experience and it's been traumatic, you need to express that. But when we're talking about it not being emotive, just be mindful of the language that we're using in the submission. It needs to be more statesmanlike than anything else if it's going to carry some weight. But it's really, really important that people take this opportunity over the next 2 days that still remain. And I'm going to leave Lindsay with this document, which has all of the details so that your viewers can easily access the information.
We can pop that up with this. We were hoping to do this live. We had to shut down because of events earlier, just for the protection of the gear and get that secured. I just want to come back and mention that there's an interesting part here when they're talking about, this is the West Australian Government website, and they've made a number of recommendations of what to do in terms of how to respond. But they seem to have a caveat on the bottom of that. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, and it talks about making information that you may not want to be accessed by freedom of information. So that's not my question. My question is, how do you find the government giving that recommendation where yourself have made a number of FOI applications, as have the Nationals as well in this place, and they just find that they're all redacted?
Yeah, look, to be perfectly frank, it actually makes me sick. And the reason I say that is because I tabled a petition last year signed by thousands and thousands of Western Australians, and the purpose of the petition was to say to the government, we would like you to table in Parliament all of the health advice that you say justified the state of emergency declaration and the health modelling that you're relying on. viewers will recall that Mach McGowan, whether you like him or dislike him, he consistently said, I am following the health advice. And the view of myself and many, many thousands of Western Australians was, okay, well, that's fine, but then you need to provide it to Parliament. And we tabled a petition on that. And in fact, I'll leave you with this as well, Lindsay. And this is the response. This is the response from the Health Minister, well, the replacement Health Minister, because people will recall that it was Roger Cook, then it then changed to Amber Jade Sanderson. And this was her response to the petition. She says, and I quote, "It is disappointing to receive a petition from members of the community and tabled by a members of Parliament," that's what she said, "that seek to undermine the government's efforts to keep Western Australians safe." Now that is just treating Western Australians with utter contempt. No one has tried to undermine anything. All we've said is you have said, Mr McGowan, Ms Sanderson, you have said you're relying on the health advice. Show us the health advice. There should be really no problem in that. And so for them to continue to keep that secret, remember they still have kept it secret to this day. And then, as you say, in their terms of reference here, to sort of almost put people off from putting in a submission because, oh, watch out, you might be caught by freedom of information. It actually makes me sick. It's such a double standard. It's such gross hypocrisy. But I don't want people to feel frightened by that. With respect to the freedom of information application, obviously you just need to be sensitive about that. You know, you don't need to overly reveal personal matters with respect to your family and the like. Try to keep it at a systemic level, at a general level. You know, what were your concerns with regard to the management of the pandemic? Or, you know, potentially if you think that they did a good job in the pandemic, well, so be it, then say so.
And I think it's important as well with the submissions, you can go on, and we'll put a link on this stream once we push this out. With that, you can go on and have a look at that. There's a number of questions. You don't have to answer each and every one. You may only answer one part of the question.
Yes.
And Nick Goiran, you did mention the health advice, as you've said, and I just want to apologise for just trying to navigate.
No, that's okay.
There's one particular part that I did want to pick up on, and I'm going to take you back to May 2022, where the Emergency Services Minister Stephen Dawson was talking in Parliament on the amendments or the extension of Section 72A. Those that may not be familiar with that, under the Act, it's where the powers that enabled the Aboriginal communities to be locked down and so on and so forth. There's a range of powers predominantly set up to deal with floods, cyclones and natural disasters like that. And Stephen Dawson said whether or not in Western Australia that the state of emergency will be based on expert evidence primarily, and the advice of the Chief Health Officer and the State Emergency Coordinator, and whether I, as the Minister for Emergency Services, am satisfied that extraordinary measures are required at the time to prevent and minimise the loss of life, prejudice to safety and health of persons and animals. So my point there is, the very next month in parliamentary debate, with your robust questioning of Stephen Dawson, he admitted he doesn't see.
He never saw the health advice. No, that's right, exactly. And again, this is the extraordinary thing. You have Mr McGowan and others saying, we're basing all of these decisions upon health advice. Number one, okay, well, you say that, then show us the health advice. No, they won't do that. Yep. And then secondly, when you then ask the Emergency Services Minister, well, have you seen the health advice before you go and make these decisions? Oh no, I've never seen it. I mean, that's truly extraordinary. That is really what would be a good an Aussie expression. I think an Aussie expression at this point would be saying that they are treating us like mugs. And that is not acceptable. And as I say, whether you think that the government did a good, bad or ugly job in the pandemic, surely we can all agree that whether it's a Liberal government or a Labor government, it doesn't really matter. They should be transparent. If they say they're relying on health advice, provide it to the West Australian people. And that didn't happen, and that's why I think that it'd be really important that people, at the very least, said that. If they say nothing else, say that you are disappointed about the lack of transparency by the government about the expert evidence that they supposedly were relying on. That would be valuable in itself, because if we don't say anything, then of course the government will say, well, see, everyone thought we did a great job.
And I think that's number two on the terms of reference. You can make that fit in relation to that there, because small business took a massive hit, and Premier McGowan has said there's minimum lockdowns in Western Australia, but the impact we really don't know. The education system, we have a whole cohort that was disrupted with their ATAR, for example, the effects of we won't actually know for some years to come where that falls in. So I think, whilst it may be, if you look at the statements of Premier McGowan, he says, if I had my time again, I wouldn't have done anything different.
Yes, and that really is a kick in the guts to people. See, again, if I try to be as charitable as possible in this situation, I will be and I've said this many times before, I'll be the first to concede that whoever was the Premier at that time, whether it's Mach McGowan or anybody else, it would have been a difficult job. I mean, I don't think any of us would really have envied being in that position, whether you're in Western Australia or a leader of another state or another nation. It would be very, very difficult to be a leader in any pandemic situation. I'm happy to concede that point, but it doesn't mean that as a result of that you're entitled to treat people with contempt, which is what has happened, and it doesn't justify the arrogance. I mean, imagine a person coming along and saying, well, I wouldn't have done anything different. Oh, but what, so everything that you did was perfect? It's beyond reproach? Well, I know of many, many thousands of Western Australians who would strongly disagree with that. Even those who would say, look, on the whole, we thought he did an okay job. But they would themselves would say there are things that could be improved. And surely if there's ever to be a pandemic again, wouldn't we want to have learnt the lessons from this particular experience? So that the arrogance of that response, again, makes me sick.
And there is, we covered we covered there was a couple of protest rallies here, we covered that, but we door-stopped a lot of the parliamentarians coming in, asking them a simple question: are they comfortable with the decision when you're talking about extending the pandemic? This discussion, I guess, is there is time to get your submission in, but I guess the fact that we can fall into a COVID declaration is something that you still are aggrieved about, and people should be aggrieved with as well.
Yes, very much so, and that's a separate petition that I've been involved in. So just to give people an update about that, that is the replacement scheme that the McGowan government put up. They were under a lot of pressure because they were maintaining this really false state of emergency. Even if you think that there was a justifiable state of emergency at the beginning of the pandemic, once Mr McGowan and Mr Cook are flying internationally telling people to come to Western Australia, it's clearly no longer a state of emergency. That just makes a mockery of the whole concept. So there was a lot of pressure being exerted by a lot of Western Australians, and eventually they had to capitulate, especially when it became clear that the emergency minister is not even reading the health advice himself. They then replaced it with this other scheme, and that scheme is of concern because really at the stroke of a pen they could reactivate these things through the Police Commissioner, and so I have tabled a petition on behalf of thousands of Western Australians that's currently before a parliamentary committee. It is the Standing Committee on Environment and Public Affairs, and they are looking into this, and where that sits at the moment is that myself and the principal petitioner have been asked to put in a submission, and we're working on that and need to meet a deadline, I think, within the next fortnight.
Well, I guess that is promising, that it actually let's come back to the petitions. I did a stream recently with Senator Alex Antic, and I asked him, because I've said essentially we find ourselves voiceless here in Western Australia since things have moved predominantly left, aside from yourself. People may not, the left side or the right side of politics, in terms of this, there's no denying that your voice has been tall, and you have stood and been a voice for people of Western Australia. So you're supporting them. How can they support you?
Look, continue to participate. This is the wonderful thing about and the privilege of living in a modern democracy, even though if at times we sometimes feel like we're living under a dictatorship disguised as a democracy. Nevertheless, it is a real privilege to be a Western Australian and to live in a place like we have. We've seen very robust rallies even at Parliament today, but what a luxury to be able to do that, to be able to come here and to, be able to have these kind of discussions. So we must never take that for granted. And so the thing that I would encourage people to do is don't be complacent, participate. This is the good thing about a democracy, is you've got an opportunity to participate. It may not be to the standard that we would like. We might get exasperated at times with the non-answers and the contempt that comes from government, but participate. If we don't participate, then really all is lost. And that's why really the message today is you've got 2 days to put in a submission. Don't miss the opportunity.
And I think that's where you gave your time. Based on that, we reached out and you felt it was important enough to say exactly that message. So speaking of that, 2 days' time, we know that you're about to step in there. Nick Goiran, we appreciate your comments, and it's not too late for people to make those submissions. We will pop this up on with this stream, and we'll put some links in relation to the submission. A final departing word, or can I? So while we have you here, can we get a commitment? We can come and chat to you about a couple of other things in the near future.
Look, absolutely. I mean, those who are following politics at the moment or this year will know that there's been some changes for me in terms of my official role, and so one of the benefits that comes of that is that I'm largely unrestricted. And so yes, happy to come and talk about any topic.
There we go. So we've got that on tape. So and we'll know. Yes. So for myself, Lindsay, we've got Clayton and Bill here, and to all those that are watching, pop your comments in. We will be making a time to speak to the Honourable Nick Goiran, hopefully later this week. Pop some questions in on the back of this stream after you've put your submission in. 16th of that's Thursday this week. I think it's 2 o'clock it closes, and so from myself, Lindsay at Freedom Media, and the Honourable Nick Goiran, thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks very much, Lindsay. Cheers.
Okay, so there we go, just bringing up the documentation there that Nick Goiran was referring to. And just bear with me, because I do need to just bring up the second document, which is talking about the inquiry. So why I just leave that there, I'm just going to, behind the scenes, just grab that. Doesn't seem to be wanting to load. Apologies for that. I do have the document here. I guess the main important part for people to note is, as we've mentioned a number of times, that the submissions closes 16th of March, which is this Thursday. You can go onto the WA government website and complete the form there, or you can send an email in. I would suggest, in terms of making sure that you have a record to ensure that you actually did in fact send off an email. I know that there can always be an issue with receiving it, but if you send it to the right address and there was an issue, you should get a bounce back on that, which will let you know that there's a problem. Rather than relying on the West Australian Government website on a pandemic inquiry that they really just perhaps going through the motions. So it's, but having said that, there is a really strong cause to make a submission. The email address is COVID, this is all one word, I'll start again, covid-19review@dpc.wa.gov.au. That's covid-19review@dpc.wa.gov.au. So we did mean to bring you that stream live today, but unfortunately, because of particular issues, which we will go in, we are going to do a stream on what happened today. Some of you may have already seen some footage on that. we have some further footage because we were recording on the cameras at the time, which is quite compelling in itself. We're just trying to do a bit of a reorg there in relation to that. One thing I will just say before I end this stream is whilst we were at Parliament, we jumped in on a press conference. It was the opposition leader, the Nationals leader, Shane Love, who was speaking about the the Perth Mint saga. Now, some of you may have already seen the particular stream that that Channel 7 mainstream, Channel 9, the ABC were also there. I was trying to flick through between the two to see what they said. There was a number of questions that were asked there. Of course, the main storyline for mainstream media was that they were pushing, that is Shane Love was pushing for a Royal Commission, and McGowan's come out today in Parliament and said no, which I must say, that with the ABC, he did. I did have a link that's just come through, and McGowan dropped a few bombs today in Parliament with his language, just in relation to this, saying that the whole thing is, you can insert whatever word you like here, but a storm in a teacup. It is way more than a storm in a teacup. It is certainly something that that perhaps a Royal Commission should go. So we've waited for tonight to see what mainstream media do, and then tomorrow we're going to bring you the press conference as we saw it. We had 2 cameras filming there. We actually had an opportunity to put a question to Shane Love, a question that mainstream media should be asking, but they're not asking. And he himself said that it was a very good question. It goes to the credibility of Mark McGowan. That's as much as I will take it at this stage. And, you know, there was, well, let me think, 7 journalists there. All have the opportunity, all have their finger on the pulse in relation to this. But it's very, very tightly sort of wound in terms of the frames that they're asking these questions. Of course, they're not wanting to rock the boat. They could go as hard as they like with Shane Love. But of course, at the end of the day, they would probably be slipping around the corner sometime tomorrow, the next day, later this week, and having to front the Premier himself in relation to this. But I think that's it from me. I'm going to sign off because I'm going to be prepping for another stream tonight, and we will be, with a bit of luck, we will be bringing in Posey Parker for a slow chat. So hopefully from 8 o'clock tonight. From me, for now, that's all I have to say on this. I hope you've enjoyed the stream. Thank you for your comments.